"I don't want to die this winter," robbed woman begged Lakota warrior. His response changed everything. Winter came early that year, covering the plains with a thick layer of snow. The wind blew fiercely across the empty landscape, carrying a sharp chill that cut through even the thickest clothing. It was a winter that no one had expected so soon, and the world felt harsher and lonelier than ever. Trees stood bare, their branches reaching like thin fingers into the gray sky. The ground was frozen hard, and every step was a struggle. In the middle of this frozen wilderness, a young woman stumbled through the snow, her face pale and lips blue from the cold. She was weak, hungry, and frightened, and yet she kept moving forward, one painful step at a time. She had been traveling west for several days when a group of thieves had attacked her small caravan. They had taken almost everything she owned, her food, her small bag of clothes, and even the few coins she had managed to carry. She had tried to run, but the thieves were stronger, faster, and more ruthless than she had imagined. By the time they left her behind, she was alone, injured, and very scared. The landscape stretched endlessly before her, nothing but white snow and gray sky, and the silence was broken only by the harsh whistle of the wind. Every sound seemed magnified. Every movement made her heart leap. She had walked for hours, then days, without finding shelter, and the cold was beginning to take its toll. Her legs ached, her fingers were numb, and she felt her strength leaving her with every step. The snow crunched under her worn boots, and her thin coat offered little protection from the winter chill. She thought about the stories she had heard as a child, tales of people who had survived the cold through courage and determination. She tried to remember those stories now, clinging to them like a lifeline. "I can survive," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling from exhaustion and cold. "I must survive." Time seemed meaningless in the endless white expanse. She stumbled again, falling to her knees in the deep snow, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Her hands were red and raw from the cold, and she could feel frost starting to bite at her skin. The fear of dying alone in the snow began to press on her chest. She had never felt so helpless. Her journey, once full of hope and dreams, had become a battle simply to stay alive. She hugged herself tightly, shivering uncontrollably, wishing she could find a warm place, even for just one night. Then, in the distance, she saw something. A figure standing still on the ridge above the frozen plains. At first, she thought it might be another thief, another person who would take what little she had left. Her heart raced, and fear gripped her tightly. But as she squinted through the snow, she realized this person moved differently. There was a calm, steady presence about him. He did not approach quickly or aggressively. He simply stood, watching, as if waiting for the right moment. He was tall, strong, and wrapped in furs, and his dark eyes scanned the white landscape. The young woman's heart was filled with both hope and fear. Could this person be dangerous, or could he help her? She wanted to cry out, to call for help, but her voice was weak and hoarse from the cold. She sank to her knees again, the snow around her dampening her clothes, and whispered into the biting wind, "I don't want to die this winter." The words were fragile, barely reaching beyond her lips, but somehow they carried across the distance to the man watching. The Lakota warrior, for that is what he was, saw the young woman struggling in the snow. He had been traveling along the ridge, checking the plains for signs of danger or game. His eyes, trained to notice details, saw that she was injured and in serious trouble. He understood immediately that she would not survive long in the cold alone. He moved closer, carefully, without making sudden movements that might scare her. His footsteps were silent in the snow, and yet every step was purposeful. He did not rush, because rushing could startle her, and she might run or collapse further. When he reached her, he knelt in the snow a few feet away, showing that he meant no harm. He spoke gently, his voice calm and steady, even though the wind carried it in strange directions. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. The young woman looked at him with wide eyes, unsure if she could trust him, unsure if he would leave her or help. She shook her head slightly, too tired to speak. She felt a small flicker of hope, the first warmth she had felt in days. The warrior offered his hand to help her stand, and she hesitated, then reached for it. His grip was firm but kind, and he pulled her slowly to her feet. He did not speak much, but his presence alone was enough to give her a sense of safety she had not felt since she was robbed. She stumbled beside him as he guided her to a nearby cluster of trees that blocked the worst of the wind. Here, he had prepared a small camp. A fire burned steadily, and he had blankets and furs ready. Even in this cold, harsh winter, the warmth of the fire was comforting, and the young woman felt tears slip down her cheeks. She had been so close to despair, and now she was alive because of this stranger. He moved around the camp efficiently, preparing food and wrapping her in layers of furs. The smell of hot broth filled the small space, and her stomach growled weakly. She had not eaten for nearly 2 days. He did not ask many questions, and she did not offer answers. Words felt unnecessary for now. Actions mattered more. He placed the bowl of warm broth near her hands and gestured for her to drink. Hesitantly she sipped, feeling the warmth spread through her body, chasing away some of the cold that had settled deep into her bones. Over the next few hours, she began to recover some of her strength. Her hands and face were still red from frost, but the warmth of the fire helped ease the worst of the pain. The warrior moved quietly, respecting her space but keeping watch over the camp. She noticed how he cared for every detail, stacking firewood carefully, checking that the blankets were dry and warm, and keeping a lookout through the trees. It was clear he had spent many winters like this, surviving in the harsh cold with skill and care. Sitting by the fire, the young woman finally found the courage to speak. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice small. The warrior looked at her with steady eyes. "Because no one should die alone in the snow," he said simply. "Everyone deserves a chance to survive." His words were plain, without any flourish, but they carried a depth of meaning that made her heart swell with gratitude. For the first time in days, she felt that she was not alone, that there was someone who cared enough to protect her life. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the small camp, there was a sense of safety. The young woman curled into the furs, letting the warmth seep into her frozen body. He thought about the journey that had brought her here, the thieves who had robbed her, and the endless snow that had threatened to take her life. And yet, for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. She would survive this winter. She had to survive because she had found someone willing to stand by her side. As the night fell, the warrior kept watch, his eyes scanning the snowy horizon. He did not speak, but his presence was reassuring. She watched him quietly, feeling a connection she could not explain. This stranger, a Lakota warrior, had entered her life at the coldest, hardest moment, and his actions had given her life back. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and something else too, a recognition of strength and honor in him that she had never encountered before. The night passed slowly, the fire crackling as snow drifted silently against the outside of the camp. The young woman drifted into a deep, exhausted sleep, feeling for the first time in days that she might survive this harsh winter. And somewhere in the quiet of the snow-covered plains, a bond had begun, one of trust, courage, and the simple human need to protect one another against the cold, indifferent world. The next morning, the young woman woke to the soft glow of the fire. The snow outside had turned even whiter overnight, covering the land in a quiet blanket that muffled every sound. Her body felt stiff, but the warmth of the furs and the broth she had drunk the night before had given her strength she did not realize she had lost. She blinked against the dim light, realizing for the first time how much she had suffered over the last days. Hunger, cold, and fear had taken more than her energy. They had taken her sense of hope. Yet now, as she looked around the small camp, she felt a cautious relief. She was alive. The Lakota warrior had been awake long before her. She noticed him moving carefully near the fire, adjusting logs and ensuring the flames burned steadily. He had prepared a small area for her to sit while he worked quietly around the camp. He offered no words, only a nod to show it was safe to move closer. The simplicity of his presence, calm and strong, reassured her. She felt a little strength return in her legs as she stood, walking slowly toward the fire. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice a whisper almost carried away by the wind outside. He glanced at her and nodded once. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. I think so," she said, wrapping the warm furs tighter around her shoulders. "It feels like the first night I have truly rested in days." The warrior did not reply immediately. Instead, he handed her a small bowl of warm broth. The steam rose gently, carrying the smell of cooked vegetables and herbs. She took it with both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her chilled body. She sipped slowly, savoring each mouthful. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to think beyond immediate survival. As she ate, she noticed the care with which he moved around the camp. He checked the firewood, adjusted the blankets, and even tidied a small pile of snow near the entrance to keep the wind from blowing inside. It was clear he had done this many times before, living in winter's harshest conditions, and he expected the land to test those who traveled through it. She felt admiration growing in her chest, not only for his skills but for the quiet patience he carried, the calm way he faced the cold and danger without panic. After she finished the broth, he gestured for her to follow him outside. Hesitant but curious, she stepped carefully into the snow. The wind was sharp and the white light of the snow made her squint, but she could see he had cleared a small path to a nearby cluster of trees. The trees offered shelter, breaking the strongest winds and providing a place where he hunted or gathered food when necessary. He motioned for her to sit on a fallen log. She did so, shivering slightly, but feeling safer with him nearby. He knelt in the snow, examining a few tracks leading away from the camp. She realized he was assessing the land, looking for signs of danger or animals he could hunt for food. His focus was complete, his attention divided between the land and her safety. "Do you hunt a lot?" she asked, trying to fill the silence. He glanced at her briefly, then returned to studying the tracks. "When winter comes, hunting is necessary. Without it, survival is impossible. But it is not just hunting. It is knowing the land, knowing the snow, the wind, the signs that tell you what is near." She nodded, trying to imagine living in this way. Her life had never been like this. Always in towns, always surrounded by people. And now everything she knew felt distant and fragile. She had always thought of survival as simple: food, shelter, and help if needed. But now she understood that real survival required more: attention, patience, and understanding the world around her. Over the next few hours, the warrior taught her small things about the land. He showed her how to find dry branches for the fire, how to read tracks in the snow, and how to protect herself from the sharp wind. She was clumsy at first, fumbling with sticks and snow-covered rocks, but he was patient. He never raised his voice or showed frustration. Instead, he guided her gently, letting her learn through trial and error. Each small success brought her a sense of confidence she had not felt in days. As the sun climbed higher, the wind began to calm slightly. The warrior finally sat back, watching her work with a faint sense of satisfaction. She looked up at him, a little breathless from the effort. "I didn't think I could do this," she admitted. "You can," he said simply. "You survived this far. That shows strength. You have only to learn how to use it." His words sank deeply into her mind. It was strange, almost impossible that a stranger, someone she had feared only yesterday, could make her feel both protected and capable. She realized that survival was not just about the body, it was about the mind and heart too. She felt a quiet determination forming inside her. She would learn, she would survive, and she would repay the kindness he had shown her in any way she could. The rest of the day passed with more lessons and small tasks. He showed her how to clear snow from around the camp, how to maintain the fire so it would not go out during the long night, and how to ration the small supplies of food he had. Each lesson was simple, but it carried a depth of wisdom she had never experienced before. She began to see the world not as an endless expanse of snow and danger, but as a place where skill, patience, and courage could keep one alive. As evening approached, the wind grew stronger again, but the young woman felt more prepared. She had learned to move carefully, to shield herself from the cold, and to rely on her own growing strength. Sitting by the fire wrapped in warm furs, she watched the snow fall gently outside and felt a small, comforting sense of security. The warrior did not speak much during the evening. He tended to the fire, checked the perimeter, and occasionally glanced at her to make sure she was safe. She understood that his quiet presence was another form of protection, more powerful than words, more reliable than promises. He had given her food, warmth, and knowledge, but more than that, he had given her hope. Later, as the night grew darker, he prepared a small bed of furs for her near the fire. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should accept the comfort, but exhaustion won over hesitation. She curled up, feeling the warmth seep slowly into her frozen body. For the first time in days, she felt almost peaceful. The fear and pain of the past few days seemed distant here, in this safe place, with someone who cared enough to ensure she survived. She thought about what had brought her here. The thieves, the cold, the endless snow. It all felt like a distant nightmare compared to the warmth of the fire and the quiet strength of the warrior. She had been alone for so long that she almost forgot what it was like to feel protected. Now she realized that kindness could exist even in the harshest places. The world was cruel, yes, but there were people who would stand firm against that cruelty, even for strangers. As she drifted into sleep that night, she reflected on what she had learned: patience, courage, observation, and trust. She understood that survival was not just about reaching the next day. It was about finding the strength to keep moving, to believe that someone or something could help you along the way. And she had found that strength in part in the calm presence of the Lakota warrior who had chosen to help her when she was weakest. Outside, the snow continued to fall silently, blanketing the world in white. Inside the small camp, a fire crackled, and the young woman slept peacefully for the first time in days. The bond between them, silent and strong, had begun to grow. Trust and respect had been planted in these few hours, nurtured by care, patience, and the quiet understanding of life in the winter wilderness. This was only the beginning. Winter was still long, and danger still lurked in the snow-covered plains, but she no longer felt completely alone. She had survived one night, she would survive the next. And she had found someone willing to walk beside her in a world that could be cold and unforgiving. The knowledge that she was not entirely alone gave her hope, and that hope would carry her through the dark, cold nights ahead. The following days passed slowly, each marked by the quiet rhythm of survival and the harsh winter. Snow continued to fall, covering the plains and hiding the path behind them. The young woman had grown stronger, though her muscles ached constantly, reminding her that she had been weak and vulnerable only days before. Every movement required effort, every step through the snow a test of endurance. Yet, she was learning. Each day, under the guidance of the Lakota warrior, she discovered her own strength. He had a way of teaching, without rushing, without showing frustration. He would demonstrate an action once and then step back, letting her try on her own. If she stumbled, he did not scold or correct harshly. Instead, he adjusted her grip or showed a small motion again and let her try again. In these simple lessons, reading the tracks in the snow, stacking firewood, tending the fire, she felt a growing confidence. She realized that strength came not only from the body, but from patience, attention, and the willingness to keep trying even when it seemed impossible. One morning she awoke to find him gone from the camp. She felt a flicker of worry but also curiosity. Soon she noticed the tracks he left in the snow, clear and deliberate. He had gone to hunt for food. While he was gone, she stayed near the fire, tending it carefully, as he had taught her. She remembered every small instruction: how to place the wood, how to protect the flames from the wind, how to move quietly if the snow shifted under her weight. For the first time, she felt capable. She was no longer just surviving. She was learning to live in this winter world. When he returned hours later, a small bundle of game in his arms, she watched silently. The warrior had a careful, quiet presence that made even the most ordinary tasks seem deliberate and important. He cleaned and prepared the food efficiently, offering some to her first. She felt a pang of gratitude as she took the warm meat, savoring the taste, not just for hunger, but for the reassurance of being alive, fed, and cared for. The warrior did not speak much about himself, and she did not push. She understood that some things could not be asked, only observed. She noticed his movements, the way he treated the land, the animals, and even the snow. He walked softly, leaving minimal impact on the world around him. He respected every detail of his surroundings, and she began to understand that this respect was part of why he had survived winters harsher than any she had imagined. Over time, they began to speak in small bursts. The young woman shared simple stories of her past, how she had traveled west, what she had hoped to find, the people she had known. The warrior listened quietly, nodding but not interrupting. When he spoke, his words were clear and considered. He told her about survival, the importance of observation, patience, and respect for the land. His teachings were practical, but they carried wisdom beyond the immediate task. She began to understand that survival was about more than warmth or food. It was about understanding the world, the patterns of nature, and the strength of the human mind to endure. One afternoon, while tending the fire, she noticed him looking toward the horizon, eyes scanning the snow-covered plains. She followed his gaze but saw nothing. "What do you see?" she asked. "Signs," he said simply. "Life moves quietly. You must notice the small things." She tried to understand, watching the snow, the patterns of the trees, and the faint movements of distant animals. At first, it was confusing. But as the day passed, she began to notice what he meant. Tracks in the snow, subtle changes in the wind, even the behavior of the fire itself. She realized that survival required attention, not just strength. She felt a sense of awe at how much she had missed before, how blind she had been to the world around her. As the days continued, she also noticed changes in herself. Her fear began to soften, replaced by a cautious confidence. She could move through the snow more easily, her body responding to the cold with greater resilience. Her mind, which had been clouded with fear and doubt, began to focus on practical matters: how to build a shelter, how to maintain warmth, and how to anticipate the needs of both herself and the warrior. She realized that she was no longer entirely dependent on him. She had learned enough to help herself and even to contribute to the tasks of survival in small but important ways. The bond between them grew quietly. There was no rush, no dramatic gestures. It was a connection built on shared survival, on trust earned through action, on the simple knowledge that each relied on the other. The young woman began to understand that the warrior's calm presence was not only protective, but also reassuring. She no longer flinched when he moved near her. Instead, she felt a quiet safety in his proximity. His silence was not cold, but comforting. She learned to watch, listen, and understand without needing every word explained. One evening, as the light faded and the wind howled stronger than usual, she noticed him preparing the camp with unusual care. He checked the firewood, moved blankets, and even arranged snow around the perimeter to reduce wind entry. She asked, "Is something coming?" He shook his head slightly. "Winter brings challenges. You must always be ready, even if danger is not visible." She nodded, understanding that life in the winter wilderness required constant preparation. She followed his example, stacking firewood, covering the blankets more carefully, and even checking the small area around the camp for signs of animals or movement. Each action, however small, gave her a sense of purpose and control. That night, as they sat near the fire, she dared to speak more personally. "I never thought I would survive this long," she admitted. "After I was robbed, I thought I would die alone in the snow." He glanced at her, eyes steady and calm. "Many face winter alone. Many do not survive. But you are here. That shows courage." His words were simple, but they carried weight. She realized that courage was not about being fearless. It was about continuing even when fear is present, about making the choice to survive, to keep moving, to learn. She felt a new respect for herself and for the warrior who had guided her through these lessons. Over the next few days, the young woman began to anticipate what the warrior would do. She learned when to gather wood, when to feed the fire, and when to prepare food. She even began to help him check for signs of animals or tracks in the snow. He noticed her growing confidence and nodded quietly. showing approval without needing words. It was a mutual understanding. She had learned, and he trusted her. Their evenings became a time of quiet companionship. They would sit near the fire, tending it, sometimes speaking of survival, sometimes in silence. The young woman noticed that she felt safer not only because of the warrior's strength, but because of the trust that had grown between them. She was learning to rely on herself and on him, and in that balance, she felt a sense of calm she had not experienced in many months. One particularly cold morning the wind was sharp, cutting through the furs and blankets. The warrior had gone to check the perimeter of the camp, leaving her by the fire. She noticed that the snow around the camp was drifting differently, creating small ridges and pockets that could hide animals or movement. She carefully inspected the area, recalling his lessons. She adjusted small barriers and moved a piece of firewood to protect the edge of the camp. When he returned, he observed her quietly. "You notice things," he said simply. "That is important. Attention keeps you alive." She felt pride mixed with relief. She had learned something practical and meaningful. It was not just survival, it was understanding. Each day brought more lessons, more confidence, and more connection to the world around her. Winter still raged outside, the snow heavy and unyielding, but inside the camp, a different kind of warmth had grown. It was not only from the fire, but from the sense of trust, competence, and quiet companionship. The young woman realized that her fear had been replaced with understanding, her weakness with growing strength. She knew that she could face the harsh days ahead because she had learned to survive, to think, and to trust. And in that winter wilderness where death could come quietly and suddenly, she felt alive for the first time in weeks. The snow could fall, the wind could howl, and the world could remain harsh. But she had found a place where she could endure. She had learned from the warrior, and in return, he had come to rely on her, even in small ways. Together they faced the long, cold days, not as strangers, but as companions in survival, each learning from the other, each gaining strength from the shared struggle. The winter had not lessened, but she had changed. She was no longer a frightened traveler at the mercy of the land. She was learning, adapting, and becoming strong in ways she had never imagined. And most importantly, she had discovered that trust, courage, and careful attention could create a lifeline even in the coldest, most unforgiving winter. The days of winter grew longer, and the snow showed no signs of stopping. The plains were covered in a thick white blanket that reflected the weak sunlight and made everything seem endless. The young woman had grown stronger, but she knew that the cold and isolation could still be dangerous. Every movement, every decision mattered. The Lakota warrior continued to watch the land carefully, teaching her not just how to survive, but how to anticipate danger and respond wisely. One morning, while they were preparing the camp, the warrior noticed faint tracks in the snow beyond the ridge. He paused and looked closely, squinting at the shifting light and the frozen ground. "Someone has been here," he said quietly, his voice calm but alert. The young woman followed his gaze, feeling a cold knot of worry in her stomach. She had survived so far, but the thought of other people approaching filled her with uncertainty. "Who could it be?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Travelers, perhaps, or hunters, possibly thieves," he said, studying the tracks carefully. "We must be ready. You have learned to protect yourself. Remember what I taught you."
She nodded, her body tense, but her mind focused.
Over the past days, she had learned to notice subtle changes in the environment. The way the snow shifted, how the wind carried sounds, and how to observe without being seen. Now, all those lessons were about to be tested. She adjusted the furs around her shoulders and checked the small weapons and tools he had shown her how to use. She felt a mixture of fear and determination, knowing that she would not freeze or falter this time. The warrior prepared the camp quickly but carefully. He arranged the firewood to give maximum warmth and light without exposing them too much. He placed small branches and snow barriers around the edges, creating a simple defensive perimeter. The young woman watched and followed his instructions, moving with confidence that had grown steadily over the past weeks. The two of them worked in silence, communicating with small gestures and glances, Trust had been built through action, not words, and it was stronger than either could have imagined. As the day progressed, the tracks grew closer. The young woman felt her heart race, but she remembered everything she had learned. She stayed low, moving quietly and observing the surroundings. The warrior occasionally nodded to guide her, a silent reminder that they were in this together. When the first strangers appeared on the ridge, she saw them clearly. A small group, carrying packs and moving cautiously through the snow. The warrior did not panic. He stood firm, calm, and composed, his presence commanding respect. The strangers hesitated when they saw him, sensing that he was not an ordinary traveler. His posture, his quiet strength, and the careful positioning of the camp all suggested that he was prepared for whatever might come. The young woman watched, her pulse steadying as she realized that fear was only useful if it led to careful action. The warrior's calmness gave her courage. She remembered his lessons about observing before acting, about making choices based on understanding rather than panic. The strangers paused, uncertain, and the young woman felt a small surge of pride. She was part of this, capable of contributing to their safety. Hours passed, the strangers testing the area, unsure whether to approach. The warrior remained still, watching, his eyes sharp and unwavering. He showed no anger, no aggression, only readiness and strength. The young woman realized that true protection did not come from violence but from presence and confidence. The strangers finally chose to move away, perhaps realizing that the risk of confrontation was greater than any potential gain.
After the group left, the warrior turned to her. "You did well," he said quietly.
"You stayed calm. You observed. That is how we survive." She nodded, feeling a mix of relief and pride. She had faced fear and uncertainty and had not faltered. The snow continued to fall, but now it felt less threatening. She understood that the true danger was not always the cold or the wind, but unpreparedness and panic. By staying focused, she had survived not just the harsh weather, but the potential threat of others. The rest of the day was spent maintaining the camp and preparing for the long night ahead. The warrior taught her how to reinforce the snow barriers, how to check the fire regularly, and how to ration the food they had. Each task was simple, but every action carried importance. The young woman realized that survival was a series of small choices, each one building towards safety and strength. As night approached, the wind picked up again, howling through the trees and across the plains. The young woman watched the snow swirl in the light of the fire, feeling the tension of the day slowly release. She had learned that preparation and vigilance were key, and that courage was shown through careful action rather than bold gestures. The warrior moved around the camp, checking everything once more before settling near the fire. He gestured for her to sit beside him, and she did so, feeling the warmth of the fire and the presence of someone who had become more than a teacher, someone she could trust completely. "Do you think we will survive the rest of the winter?" she asked quietly, her voice a mixture of curiosity and hope. He looked at her, calm and steady. "Survival is not a matter of luck. It is a matter of preparation, understanding, and courage. If we continue to do what we know, we will endure. The snow will not defeat us." His words were simple, but they carried reassurance. She realized that her journey had transformed. She was no longer a frightened traveler at the mercy of winter and strangers. She was learning to survive, to observe, and to act with understanding. The warrior's guidance had not only protected her, but had also given her the tools to face challenges herself. Throughout the night they kept watch in turns, maintaining the fire and listening for any signs of movement in the snow. The young woman's confidence had grown so much that she did not fear the long hours of darkness. She understood the rhythms of the winterland now, the subtle sounds and shifts that signaled life or danger. She felt connected to the world in a way she had never known, each sense sharpened by necessity and experience. By morning the snow had settled again, quieter and lighter than before. The young woman looked out across the plains and realized how much she had changed. The fear that had gripped her at the beginning of her journey had been replaced by awareness and readiness. She understood that survival was not just physical but mental. She had learned patience, observation, and the power of calm action. The warrior noticed her change, and he nodded in approval. "You are learning," he said. "Strength is more than muscle. It is the mind and heart working together." She smiled slightly, feeling the truth of his words. Over the past days, she had gained more than survival skills. She had discovered her own courage and resilience. The snow and cold were still dangerous, and the world was still harsh, but she no longer felt powerless. As they continued to prepare for the rest of winter, the young woman began to anticipate challenges and respond to them with growing confidence. She helped gather firewood, checked the barriers around the camp, and even assisted in preparing food. The warrior observed her closely, offering guidance when necessary, but allowing her to act independently whenever possible. This balance of teaching and freedom strengthened her skills and her confidence, creating a bond built on trust and shared experience. Over the next days, the winter continued its slow, relentless march. The snow deepened, and the wind continued to test their resolve. But together, they faced it. The warrior's steady presence and guidance had given her a sense of safety, while her own growing skills and awareness allowed her to contribute meaningfully to their survival. The partnership between them was quiet but powerful, built on shared struggle, observation, and understanding. She realized that survival was not only about protecting herself from the cold and dangers, but also about understanding the rhythm of life in the winter land. She had learned to observe, anticipate, and act without panic, and in that knowledge, she found a new kind of strength, one that went beyond physical endurance. It was mental, emotional, and deeply grounding. By the time the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the snow with a faint orange glow, the young woman felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had faced fear, danger, and harsh conditions and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than before. She had survived not by chance, but through learning, trust, and courage. The warrior's guidance had been invaluable, but she had also found strength within herself. As night fell and the fire crackled against the howling wind, she understood that the winter was far from over. Challenges would continue to arrive, perhaps in the form of storms, hunger, or other travelers. But she no longer felt helpless or alone. She had learned the skills, the awareness, and the patience necessary to endure, and she knew, deep in her heart, that together she and the warrior could face whatever winter might bring. Winter was starting to loosen its grip on the land. The snow still lay thick on the plains, but the sun had grown stronger, melting patches here and there and revealing hints of the earth beneath. The young woman and the Lakota warrior had spent weeks surviving together, learning from each other, and slowly, the harsh days had begun to teach them more than just survival. They had learned patience, observation, and quiet courage. Now, as the long winter neared its end, both could see the world around them differently than they had at the beginning. The young woman woke to the soft orange glow of dawn reflecting on the snow. The air was cold, but it was a different cold, less biting, more manageable. She stretched, feeling the warmth of the furs around her, and looked toward the warrior. He was already tending the fire, his movements calm and deliberate, his eyes scanning the landscape as always. She noticed how natural it had become for her to watch him, to learn from him, and to anticipate his actions. She felt a quiet gratitude, knowing that he had not only saved her life, but had taught her to survive it. "Good morning," she said softly, careful not to disturb his focus. He looked at her and nodded.
Morning. The land is changing.
"Spring will come soon, but we are not finished with winter yet. There is still work to do." She smiled slightly, feeling a mix of relief and pride. She had come so far, from a frightened traveler, barely able to move in the snow, to someone capable of observing, planning, and acting. She had learned the small, vital details of survival: how to read the tracks in the snow, how to preserve firewood, how to prepare food efficiently, and most importantly, how to trust herself and her abilities. The day began with familiar tasks. They checked the perimeter of the camp, ensuring the barriers held against the wind. They gathered firewood, split it carefully, and stacked it neatly to last for days. They prepared a small meal, conserving what little game remained. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and purposeful. The young woman noticed that she no longer felt anxious or uncertain. She moved with confidence, aware of her surroundings and attuned to the subtle shifts of the snow and wind. As they worked, the warrior spoke quietly, sharing more of his knowledge. "Winter is not only a test of strength," he said. "It is a test of patience, planning, and understanding. You have learned much, but there is always more. Observe, anticipate, and act carefully." She nodded, taking in his words. They were simple, but they carried wisdom that went beyond survival. She realized that enduring the harsh winter had changed her. She was stronger, more aware, and more resilient. She felt a quiet confidence, a sense that she could face challenges without being overwhelmed by fear. Later, while tending the fire, she noticed a group of animals approaching the clearing near the camp. She pointed them out to the warrior, who observed carefully before making a decision. "We must watch them. They are not dangerous if we do not provoke them, but they can teach us." She watched as he demonstrated how to remain still, quiet, and observant. The animals moved gracefully, unconcerned by their presence, yet their tracks and behavior revealed subtle information about the land. She began to see what he meant. Survival was not about fighting or escaping, but about understanding, patience, and respect for life in all its forms. As the sun climbed higher, they continued their work, preparing for the final stretch of winter. The young woman had learned not only how to survive, but also how to thrive in the small ways that winter allowed. She could gather firewood efficiently, maintain the fire, prepare food, and even anticipate changes in the weather. The warrior observed her, a faint sense of satisfaction in his eyes. He had guided her, but she had grown into her own strength. By late afternoon, the wind had grown stronger, and the snow began to drift across the plains once more. They checked the camp carefully, reinforcing barriers and ensuring the fire was protected. The young woman noticed how much she had changed since the first days of winter. She was no longer fearful or hesitant. She was alert, capable, and aware. She had learned to act with intention, to anticipate danger, and to trust both her instincts and the guidance of the warrior. As evening fell, they sat near the fire, watching the snow swirl in the fading light. The warrior remained quiet for a while, allowing the young woman to reflect on her journey. She thought about the days when she had stumbled through the snow, weak and uncertain, and contrasted them with the present. She had survived, learned, and grown stronger. And she knew that the lessons she had learned would remain with her long after winter ended. "Do you think we will always remember this winter?" she asked quietly, looking into the fire. The warrior glanced at her, his expression calm. "We will remember because it changed us. You have learned what it means to endure, to observe, and to act. That knowledge will remain as long as you remember to use it." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words. Survival was more than reaching the next day. It was about growth, learning, and understanding. She had survived the harshest winter of her life, but more than that, she had discovered her own strength and resilience. Night fell, and the snow continued to drift softly across the plains. The young woman curled into the furs, feeling the warmth of the fire and the presence of the warrior beside her. She thought about the journey ahead. Winter would end, and spring would come, bringing new challenges and opportunities. But she no longer feared the unknown. She had learned to face it with courage, awareness, and confidence. The next morning, the sun shone brighter, and the snow began to melt in patches, revealing the first hints of green beneath. The young woman and the warrior packed up the camp, preparing to continue their journey through the changing landscape. They moved efficiently, their partnership seamless and natural. She felt a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that she had become more than a survivor. She had become capable, aware, and strong. As they traveled, she looked at the warrior with gratitude. He had saved her life, taught her how to endure, and shown her the value of patience, observation, and careful action. She had learned from him, but she had also discovered her own strength. She realized that she could face challenges, overcome fear, and act with purpose, even in the harshest conditions. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the plains. The snow was beginning to retreat, and the land below was slowly revealing signs of life. Streams flowed more freely, and small plants began to poke through the melting snow. The young woman took a deep breath, feeling a sense of renewal and hope. She had endured the winter, learned its lessons, and emerged stronger and wiser. The warrior stood beside her, observing the land. "The world is changing," he said quietly. "And so are we. You have learned well. Remember these lessons, and they will guide you in the future." She nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and respect. The winter had been harsh, but it had taught her more than she could have imagined. She had discovered courage, resilience, and the power of careful observation and preparation. She had survived not only the cold and snow, but also fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And she had done so with the guidance of someone who believed in her strength, even when she had doubted herself. As they continued across the plains, the young woman felt a sense of freedom and confidence she had never known before. The snow still covered much of the land, but she no longer saw it as a threat. It was a challenge, yes, but one she was prepared to face. She had learned the value of trust, courage, and careful observation. She had learned to survive, adapt, and endure. By evening, they reached a small grove where they could rest safely. The young woman looked around, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The winter had been long and harsh, but it had ended with a transformation. She was no longer the same person who had stumbled through the snow, weak and frightened. She was stronger, wiser, and more capable. As night fell, she sat near the fire with the warrior, feeling the warmth and safety they had created together. She thought about the lessons she had learned: patience, observation, careful action, and trust. She realized that these lessons would guide her for the rest of her life. She had survived the winter, grown stronger, and discovered a new understanding of courage and resilience. The warrior watched the stars appear in the clear night sky, his expression calm and steady. The young woman looked up at him, feeling a quiet gratitude. He had not only protected her life, but had taught her to value her own strength and courage. Together they had faced the challenges of winter, and had emerged stronger and wiser. As she lay down to rest, she thought about the journey ahead. Winter was ending, but life would continue to test her. She felt ready. She had learned to survive, to observe, and to act with courage. She had discovered her own strength and resilience, and she knew that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The snow continued to fall softly, a reminder of the harsh winter they had endured. But inside the small grove by the fire there was warmth, safety, and hope. The young woman had survived. She had grown stronger, and she had learned the value of trust, courage, and careful action. As she closed her eyes, she felt a deep sense of peace. Winter had tested her, taught her, and transformed her. And she knew that she would carry these lessons with her for the rest of her life. She had survived the winter, and in doing so she had discovered not only her own strength but also the quiet power of trust, guidance, and courage in the face of life's challenges.